Welcome! Today we're gonna throw something really big because let's be honest, size matters. There's just something great about big things. Like I've been throwing these really big pots, vases, and even if you don't want to go this big and just do something in this size, there's still some challenges. If you're like me, if you have been throwing for a while or maybe just started out, I'm sure that you've been thinking about how you can go bigger. And maybe you've been scared about having to deal with a really big ball of clay. Maybe you only done half a kilo, maybe 2 kilos, and you're thinking, wow, if I have to do like 5 or 10 or 15 kilo, that's going to be impossible. I don't have the strength to do that. But today I'm going to show you how you can start working with bigger lumps of clay and do bigger pots without being super strong. I'm not very strong myself, and I still managed to do it. So let's go ahead with that. When throwing something really big, there are basically two different ways that you can do it. Either you can get a bigger lumps of clay and use that to pull that enormous pot, or you can, as I do very often with these bigger ones like this one, it's thrown in two sections. We also call it sectional throwing. You can look it up, there's other videos about that too. This one was essentially made in two sections. So first I was throwing this part up until something like here. You can't actually see it, which is the whole purpose of this. And then I was throwing the other section upside down, turn it around, and glued them together, massaged them together, and trimmed them, and textured it in this case. And it becomes like one pot. If you want to do really big things like this, or even bigger, I mean, there's no limit except, of course, for your kiln. I will recommend that you go with the sectional throwing. You could, of course, also just put a really, really big bowl of clay, and I've seen, especially like these Chinese throwers that throw like hundreds of kilos of clay. I don't know how they do it, and it requires enormous amount of strength. This doesn't require that much strength, and it's a lot easier way to do really, really big. So that's one reason to do it. The other is that if you have a big ball of clay and you try and pull it up, in my experience, the weight of the clay in the top kind of pushes it down. So even though you're trying to pull up all that clay, it still kind of sinks. So in my experience, I haven't been able to do pots much bigger than about 50 centimeter. Even if I do 10 kilos of clay, it's still, when I get to that high, it's kind of, collapse a little bit for me. 50 centimeters is still a big pot. So maybe you just want to go that route too. For a pot like this, this could more easily be done in one go. I think this is about 4-5 kilos of clay. It's a lot less now after it's been dried and fired, and it's been pit fired, by the way. I like these beautiful colors you get from that. Today we're going to start out with a decent sized ball, not too big. We're going to do 5 kilo, and so let's get on with that. First, of course, we're going to need some clay. And in order to throw really big things, I would recommend that you use a solid stoneware with some crock in it. It makes it a little more stable and easier to throw. It doesn't need to be a lot of crock, but I like to use this one. It's a wonderful clay. It does actually have a lot of crock, it's 40%, but the size is very small, so it doesn't feel so crocky. And it's got a wonderful color, there's a lot of iron in it, and it plays really well with the glazes that I like to use. So we're going to use this one today, and we're going to start out with 5 kilo, so half a pack. These ones comes in 10 kilo, just about 22 pounds or something. So we're going to take half of that. So the first step is wedging. Your pottery teacher and other potters may have told you that you always have to wedge your clay before you throw it. That's not entirely true. It depends a little bit on how well the clay is compressed and if there's any air bubbles in it from the supplier. This particular clay is from Georg & Schneider in Germany, and they actually do a really good job at compressing the clay in the bags. So you need to actually take it just right out of the pack and put it on the wheel. So the only thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna slam it a few times to lift it up a little bit and to shape it, but I'm not actually going to wedge it, and it works fine. I start out by just slamming it on my wedging table here, and this is actually just a stone. I think it's called, I don't know, it's for payments, very, very cheap in a builder's market, but it works really well. So start just slamming it a little bit. That kind of puts it into a shape a little bit, and it becomes a little more lively, a little more soft. When you want to throw something big, you want it to be soft enough to actually pull all that clay, but you don't want it to be so soft that it just fall apart. So this is actually really, really good. But you have to experiment with that. It can be much easier with the right consistency and much more difficult if it's not right. So in case it's not as well compressed and mixed as this clay is, one way to wedge a really big chunk of clay like this, because the normal way of wedging is difficult with 5 or 10 or even more kilos, is I just slap it like this, cut it up, and then you can actually see here it's so perfect. But in case it's not and you have these little bubbles, then put them together like this, slam it again, put it into shape, and then you see here we put the two pieces together. So if you turn it around like this, cut it up again, slam these two pieces together, and then continue doing that a few times, then you're going to end up with something that is actually well mixed. So in this case, I don't actually need to do much more than this. So now I'm just trying to shape it as much as I can, because the more even it's shaped now, the easier it will be to center it. And that's of course the first challenge. I like to round off my button a little bit, so we get this cone shaped here, pyramid, reverse pyramid if you like, because that way when we put it on the wheel it will extract and you won't trap any air. See, I actually got this here, that's not so good. You want to make sure that it's even at the bottom. So now it looks good. So let's go to the wheel. The first challenge is of course centering. It's always a challenge, and if you've only been centering half a kilo or a kilo, you may be thinking that centering 5 kilo or 10 kilo is going to be impossible. It's going to require so much strength. The fact is that it doesn't. I mean, it's mostly a question of technique. I've seen lots of really tiny little girls that are, with all respect, that are throwing 10 kilo or 20 kilo, and they can do it. And if you look at how they do it, it's not actually a question of strength. I'm not very strong myself, and I can still manage to do at least 10 kilo, even more. It is a question of technique. So if you are afraid of trying, please go ahead and do it. I will suggest, however, that you practice the basics of centering on smaller lumps of clay to begin with. Once it's going okay, move up, try, just put some more. If it fails, just wedge it up again and try it another day. There's no risk. So this is 5 kilo, and I will do a bowl to begin with, A bowl is a relatively easy shape to do. I will also do some tall things. I'm doing fermenting crocks at the moment. I have a lot of requests for that. But let's start out with a bowl. I always start with slapping it into place, because the better it's centered before we start actually centering, the easier it will be. So that's like the first trick. So see, it's not completely centered, but it's almost. So you already did half the work by just tapping it. And this doesn't require any strength. I've seen some, in case it's a really big lump of clay, you can also use your fist like that, because then you apply a more focused force on the clay. But this is not super big, it's just 5 kilo. So first thing, I kind of seal the bottom. And I do that because I don't want water to slip in under it, because if it do, it will very easily slip off. I'm going to lubricate the rest of it. Moving around this much clay requires a little bit of a different technique. If it's a small piece of clay, you can use the palm of your hand to push it. But with a big ball of clay like this, or even bigger, it's going to be difficult to move all that clay with the palm of your hands. Instead, you can use your fingertips, because then you apply the same force but focused on a more narrow spot, and that will create more power. So you can see, if I do it like this, you will of course get some throwing grips, but that can be even out later. So if it's difficult for you to move all the clay with the palm of your hands, use your fingertips. I usually use a combination. I'm going to do the usual coning up and down to align the particles and to help centering. In the beginning, I'm mostly focused on getting the top right. And then I slowly move down the sides to center that too. So now we're almost there. That only took a couple of minutes, right? If it sounds like I'm losing my breath, I do. I mean, as I said, it doesn't require 5 times more force to center, 5 times more clay, but it does take some. So this is my fitness. This is gonna be a shallow ball, shallow bowl, like this. I want to start out with a base that is not too narrow. I need that to support, and then in the end, after the ball is done, I will trim it off a little bit to make it more elegant. The bigger the ball of clay, the bigger the pot you're making, the more important it is that it's super well centered. Because the bigger it gets, if there's a little bit of wobbling in the beginning, that just expands and expands, and it will be terrible by the end of the pot. So, but I think this begins to look nice now. That's decent, I think. Just gonna clean off my bat a little bit. So keeping things clean is not just a visual issue, it also helps you better see what you're doing. So for this, I'm going to open it up in a bit of a different way than I would usually do. Usually I would use my thumbs, but for this, because we want this shallow shape, I'm going to use the palm of my hand and push this down. Because that way we'll get a round button. I'm not interested in a square button as I would for a vase or cup or anything else, but for this I want a nice round. Something like that. I want to try and push it in a little bit again. I just wanted to make sure that the button down there had a nice and round shape for this. And but if you start out too wide, it can very easily get very wobbly, and it's difficult to get any height. So I'm gonna push this back in a little bit now that I made the button. For dealing with bigger lumps of clay like this, it can be difficult to know how thick the button is. But for this, it's good. I have some experience with it. It's about a little more than a centimeter. That's perfect because I want to trim a nice foot on this one. So now we pulled it in a little bit in sort of a pyramid shape, and now I'm ready to start pulling. Actually, I'm just gonna try and move a little bit of that clay, the button, from the inside up. So like this. There's still an awful lot of clay here in the corner, so I'm gonna try and push in here. Get some of that moving. Gonna color it in like this. Now we're doing the first pull. And you can let it go out just a little bit, but leave enough at the top, because this is going to be expanded a lot. So if there's not enough clay up here, it's gonna get awful thin, and you don't want it to tear apart there. Right now, I'm not too concerned with all that clay down here because it helps me support. So I will move some of it up along the pot. At this stage, you probably want to turn down the speed of your wheel a little bit, because the wider it gets, the bigger it gets, the more it's going to throw the clay around, and it can very easily get out of control. So now we sort of have the basic shape of the ball. One of the tricky things with the bowl is down here at the bottom, that you very easily get like a bump, a shoulder. Well, it takes it takes time to get rid of that, but make sure that you try and distribute that clay from the very beginning, because otherwise you're stuck with it. In worst case, especially with a big open bowl like this, you can trim it away. So don't listen to potters that tell you should never trim the inside of a bowl. You should do whatever works, and sometimes it's necessary. To make it wider, I like to start out by moving the top and then following up with the bottom, because if I move out the bottom, it will very easily collapse on me. So I know there are many different techniques for making wider bowls, but I found that this works really well. So we're going to start out at the top and lay it out like this. And then I'll support it underneath and use a rim to expand it further down the side. And be careful, because the bigger the bowl is, the longer time it takes to get around. And if you move your fingers or your ribs too fast, you're only going to influence half the bowl. You need a full circle at least. And down here, you can actually apply quite a lot of pressure, and you probably need that to move the clay and to get that stupid bump away. Also, when you're doing really wide bowls like this, make sure that your buckets is not in the way, because you are getting over the limit of your wheel head. So now the tricky part is here that all this clay up here have to be carried by this, and of course clay doesn't fly, and so you need to keep some strength down here. And right now, of course, the clay is soft, and that limits the strength. So a good trick now is to heat dry this part a little bit. That will create much more strength on this part. And since we're not doing much more shaping of that, it's fine. It's the same thing if you go up in height. Use a heat gun. I usually use an electric heat gun. If you have the facilities for it, you can also use a gas burner. The problem with the gas burner, of course, is that I find it a little more dangerous to use inside. But also, another problem with the gas burner is that it's oil-based, so it can leave a little bit of oily surface. So if you're using and ropes or slips or something before you fire it, it can sometimes not attach so well. So keep that in mind. I don't use it because of the fire hazard. So I'll just use a heat gun a little bit. I heat both on the inside and the outside. If I was only heating on the outside, there's a risk that will dry it too much just on one side and can, I don't know. So now it's a little more stiff. It's not dry at all. It's not even leather hard, but it's just a little more stiff, and it does give it some more strength. I still want to make sure that it's lubricated enough for you to work with. We can still go wider. I just wanted to make sure that it was that it's strong enough to sustain. I like to still keep the rim a little bit thicker than the wall. It sort of helps it stay in shape. Just going to use the sponge on the outside to hold, because when we push here, we don't want to push the top out too. We just want to even out the lower part of the side. So I'm just going to hold this. So, and be careful when you, when you move around a big bowl like this. I hate it for you to smash it even before it's made. So we are slowly getting there. Do you think it's big enough now? Yeah, I think we can make it a little bit bigger. It's always tricky at this point because at some point it's going to collapse. And when does it do that? Well, it depends. I think I need to heat it a little bit more. So now we can, I also like to use, let me just find it here, a metal rib. It can also help just perfect the shaping, especially on the inside here, in this case. If you're left with some sort of a small bump in here, as I mentioned, you can still trim it away. For big shell ball like this, you'll most likely have plenty of thickness in the walls to do that. And it's easy to get in here, of course. It's not actually too bad here. I think I managed to get a sort of an even slope, and it's turning out pretty well. But just in case, so don't panic if it's not completely perfect when you throw it. The last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flare out the top a little bit, and of course for that I have to be extra careful. I'm just gonna lubricate it a little bit here so my hands don't get stuck on it, but I just like the top to be a little bit wider. I don't want it to go in, I want it to go out and have that shallow feel to it. So now I got a little bit of a bump. As you can see, there's a little bit of a bump here. It looks worse now than it is, but it's actually very, very little. And as I mentioned, the thickness of the wall is good enough for me to just trim that away. It's only a few millimeters, and that will give me like a perfect slope or flow here. And that's what I'm aiming for. It's not always I get it perfect, but I think this is perfect enough for this to turn out really nice. So I think I'm gonna stop here. Just gonna make sure that, as you see, it's still very even. There's very, very little wobbling. You won't see that when it's on the table. I just want to make sure that the rim is nice and smooth, and I think I'm gonna leave it there. Isn't that nice? So let's do another one, a taller one, a fermenting crock. I'm going to lubricate it. And I always start out with just giving it a light pressure. So you see already now we're very close to being centered. You will scrape off a little bit of clay. Try not to scrape off too much because after all you want it to go into the pot. So now we have a pretty well centered ball of clay. It's 5 kilo, almost. I just scraped a very little, just a slip on the surface. And now we're ready to open it. It does take a little more time. Just take it easy. You can't open a big ball like this in just one go. At least I can't. Maybe some people can. But I use my thumbs. People use different techniques with this. But again, you can only use your thumbs down to a certain level, and then they don't reach any deeper. Make sure you have enough water in there. Then I use my hand. Some people, and I also do that when it's a very big ball, just use a fist and pushing it down. This is not a super big ball of clay. It's still decent size. And what you will often see when you do this is that you get this very narrow hole, and then when you start to expanding it, it starts wobbling around. A trick to avoid that is to not try and move all the clay at once. So first, focus on getting down to almost the thickness that you want. And in this case, I want a good thickness in the bottom because it's a big crock, and I want to trim it foot, so maybe 1.5 centimeters, something like that. And I think I'm almost there now. So now, instead of trying to move all the clay out, because that will make it wobbly and it's difficult to move all that clay, instead what I do is I put my hand down and I push it out in the bottom, and then I move it up. I push it out, move it up. Push it out and move it up. That way you don't have to move as much clay at one time, and it goes much more smooth. I'm running a little bit too fast. And always keep compressing the top so it stays even, and of course make sure that it's well lubricated. And again, I press out at the bottom. There was a little bit of an air bubble there. So, and I even it out, and again, compress the rim. And you can see already now it's wanting to go out, and that's what we have to try and avoid. It's always easy to expand it. It's very difficult to make it smaller once it's going loose. And use your fingers when you cone in. That way the rim will kind of stay even easier. And now you need to figure out what size the ball should be on the inside first. And in my case, I'm looking for something like this, and then it will move out a little bit and come in back in again for the gallery, for the lid. And as always, compress the bottom well. It will help you avoid any cracks down there. And push it in as soon as you are done with the button, so it doesn't flare out too much. And I'm just gonna color it in a little bit because it's a little bit too white on the outside, and we can take some of that and move it up like this. We haven't started pulling as such yet. It's still just shaping the inside, the button, and so let's just, for the sake of it, measure it again. It's still a little bit too thick, but we're getting there. So just want to take out another half centimeter or something. And as you do this, and you probably noticed as well, it's almost impossible to avoid the rim to flare out a little bit. But as soon as you're done on the inside, take it back, because if you let it stay out there, it's gonna just keep expanding, and as you get up, you won't ever get it back again. Again, we're just gonna color it in a little bit. So before we do the first pull, I like to just check that the inside of the wall is sort of even, because in the end we want walls that are as even as possible. And for this particular bowl or crock, I'm gonna build a really big gallery up here, because I'm doing this groove to put the lid in for a waterlock. So I don't wanna pull out too much of the clay on the top. So I'm mostly gonna move all that clay we have down here up through the pot and get a bit of height. And just want to make sure that's all well lubricated. Because if there's area on a pot like this, or any pot, if there's areas where it's dry, then when you get to that area, your hands are going to stick, and that's gonna take it out of position. So first I'm pushing in. There's a little bit of water here. First I'm pushing in the bottom to create a groove. With all this clay, it can sometimes feel really difficult to move too much at a time. Don't worry about that. If you're working in stoneware like I'm doing here, you have more pulls than if you were working in porcelain. I mean, lots of potters will tell you that you have to finish your pot within 2-3 pulls. I mean, in general, that's probably true and a good advice to aim for. But if you're working with stoneware, like I'm doing here with a lot of crock, in my experience, you can actually pull a lot more than that. When you get up in height, I think it can be difficult to work like this, because you kind of get in an awkward position. So sometimes I actually stand up, and then I use my thumb instead. Use my thumb down here and my hand on the inside, of course. And then I think sometimes I'm in a better position to move more clay. I mean, there's so many ways that you can pull, and there's no right or wrong way. You have to figure out what really works for you and your physical abilities. And I just found that this sometimes makes it easier for me to move more. So again, pressing the top, and I'm keeping a lot of clay up here because we do need that big gallery. So that was the first couple pulls. But we're going to do much more because we still have way too much clay. I think I just told you that we didn't need to wedge this clay because it doesn't have any air bubbles, and now of course I have an air bubble. It's always like that. But they're quite easy to get rid of. Just poke a hole with your potter's nail, and then massage the air out of it. But it's good to remove them as soon as you find them, because they're not going away by themselves. I'm gonna try and make another standing pull, and don't go too fast. The bigger the ball, the more power in the centrifuge there is, and it will just throw the clay around. I keep taking out water from the inside because as much as I like it to be well lubricated, I don't really want I don't want there to be a lake, an ocean of water in there. We need to remove that anyway in the end. So now I'm just gonna do another pull. If at some point you're feeling that it's getting too muddy or too slippery, and it's just like it's getting too soft, you can let it stand there. Let it sit on your wheel for a few hours, or maybe even for the next day. You can actually keep throwing on a pot like this for a very long time. And if you're impatient, like I am, you can also try it a little bit with a heat blower. For this one, I managed not to soak it too much. But I mean, that's the problem. If you are much faster at throwing than I am, then you can pour a lot of water on it and throw it really fast, and it won't soak into the pot. But if you're as slow as I am, then sometimes all that water will soak into the pot too much. And again, I'm going to keep quite a lot of clay up here. For the gallery. Going to compress it a little bit. And again, move it in. I don't want this to be too white. As you see, when I'm just using my hands, the sides here are not going to be super even. It's not too bad, but so at some point, for two reasons, I like to use a rib, and I'm just using this really nice flexible plastic one. Using my hands on the inside, I'm using it like this on the side, and I'm just trying to get rid of some of the throwing marks and even out the walls a little bit, because that will also give me, this is just slip, it's not so much we removed. I want to keep also the clay on the pot, but this allows me also to get a bit of feel of the thickness of the walls. If I can maybe get a little more height out of it, I should be able to do that. So now I sort of have the height that I'm looking for this particular pot, but I do want to make a bit of shaping. I want to add a little bit of body here, and I want to keep it sort of this size, maybe a little more narrow at the top. The challenge now is that once you start expanding it, it can very easily just drop in height, and I really don't want that. So I'm trying to shape it and increase the height at the same time, which is not always easy. So I just want to lubricate a little bit, not too much, and then so I'm trying to move up clay at the same time that I'm expanding it. Which I think I did okay for this first shape. What I'm trying to figure out now is if I moved enough clay from the bottom. I don't want that to be like super thick and then too thin up the walls. I want it to be even. I will cut away a little bit when I trim it down here, also to make it a little more elegant. But I don't want to cut away too much. I would rather move it up to the pot. So you see now that I'm starting to shape it, it's actually got a little bit lower. You can sometimes compensate a little bit for that by coloring it in. I mean, that you take from down here and you kind of squeeze it up. But it's a little bit tricky. See, I've got some of the height back, and then we can even out the walls again. So that's the shape of the fermenting crock. Before I do the gallery, I may push this up a little bit more, but before I do the gallery, I need to dry it a little bit here, because I will apply quite a lot of pressure to do the gallery, and to make sure that it doesn't collapse, I need to dry up the clay just below the gallery a little bit. So now I can more safely create the gallery. I'm just gonna wet it a little bit because it needs to be pushed out quite a lot. So this is my fermenting crock. I think it looks nice. I have done a lot of these. They could have been bigger for the same amount of clay, but I'm going to trim it some, and they do need to be pretty solid to sustain this sort of purpose. And I will cut down a little bit here to make it a little more elegant, and it's actually a very even wall right now. That's it. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, share, comment, whatever you like, and come back soon again, and we'll do some more throwing and some more pottery play. So hope to see you soon again.